I want to welcome you to the Pro Mindset Podcast. The Pro Mindset Podcast is all about diving into the headspace that results in championship performance. High-performing athletes, winners, have this mental flow and have a positive headspace for their performances and success. Join me, Craig Domann, sports attorney and NFL agent, on this podcast. I will interview pro athletes, college athletes, football coaches, and sports personalities. Together, we can discover how you can get in the flow and have your own pro mindset. Welcome to Pro Mindset Podcast. This is Craig Domann. It is draft week 2019, one of the most exciting times in professional football for so many people. It's a fabulous opportunity for players and their families, their parents, their teammates to watch their loved one get drafted this weekend. It's also a fabulous opportunity for NFL teams that are starving for new talent, want to rebuild their roster, want to find their franchise quarterback, want to find that player that's going to fill the hole on their starting 22, find the guy that they can develop into a potential Pro Bowler down the road. So by all accounts, I don't know if there's any other event in the NFL calendar where everybody wins. The Super Bowl, there's one winner, one loser, and 30 others that wish they were there. Whereas with the NFL draft, you will find this weekend, even the teams that don't draft won. So like Kansas City traded their first round pick this year for Frank Clark with the Seahawks, they won. So when the announcers are coming up on their pick, and Seattle gets to take that pick, they're going to shift to Kansas City, and they're going to show excerpts of Frank Clark making sacks, and Andy Reid and his people are going to talk about how they got the guy they wanted. They wanted to get a guy that was in his prime, that was proven, that was 5 to 6 years younger than Justin Houston, that they could plug and play. He's a guy that they could plug right in, and they know what they're going to get, Pro Bowl type player. So the NFL draft, as I said before, is just one of those animals where everybody gets the guy they wanted. Everybody got the best athlete on the board during their pick, because they certainly wouldn't want to pick somebody they needed. And at the end of the day, you've got 32 teams that are winners. And even though some critics will, give some draft classes a C, C minus, C plus, and not everybody's going to get A's, in the team's mind, they all got A pluses. Let's look at the mindset of a draft prospect who's expecting to go in the first round on Thursday night this week. The first rounders are picked on Thursday night, and there's about 75 players that are going to be expected to be drafted. Now, I know there's only 32 picks, but there's at least 75 guys that think they're going to go. And most of those guys, or at least half of them, will be in Nashville in the green room waiting for their phone to ring. And unfortunately, there's only 32, so many guys that think they're going to be the 32nd pick. That's the magical pick. It's not the first pick. There's only a handful of guys that think they're going to go first. But there's at least, after 31 guys are off the board, there's another 40 guys that think they're going to be that 32nd pick. And so it's almost like checking your lottery ticket to see if you have the right numbers. Everybody's got their phone fully charged. Everybody's got their phone in hand, and everybody's looking at their phone waiting for it to ring for that last pick. But there's only one guy that gets picked. So what is the mindset for these players to survive this draft process? Well, number one, I would say it's that they have to believe the best case scenario is going to come true. Even though it hardly ever does, you've got to believe it could and it will. And so when you're sitting there and you're one of those 75 guys looking to be the 32nd pick, you're thinking it's going to be you. That's just the athlete mentality. And then when it's not, so for the 39 out of the 40 that don't get picked with the 32nd pick, the mentality is big time chip on your shoulder. It's a disgrace to go in the second round. It's almost beneath them to go in the second round. And so for the rest of their career, they take it out on the rest of the league. They take it out on all the teams that, hey, I'm a first rounder, but I got taken in the second round. So that process filters down all the way to the 7th round. 3rd rounders think they should have been 2nd. 6th rounders thought they should have been 5th or 4th. And so then you get to the 7th round. The 1st round and the 7th round are the most similar rounds because there's just some finality about that 1st round. You only have 32 of them. There's no compensatory picks. And there's so many guys that think they could be or deserve to be or have been told they would be 1st rounders. But there's only 32. And then in the 7th round, you have the most compensatory picks. Generally, you have approximately 50 players drafted in the 7th round each year. And Mr. Irrelevant has really, it's almost a bipolar slot because so many guys don't want to be Mr. Irrelevant until Mr. Irrelevance picks up and they all want to be Mr. Irrelevant. So the mindset for 7th rounders is, I'm so dang glad I got picked, because once they show up in the facility at the stadium for the team that drafted them, they're going to be treated just like any of the other draft picks. No question that the 1st rounder gets a little bit of a red carpet treatment. Once you get picked, the deck's cleared and you're treated as a draft pick regardless of whether you're a 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, or 7th rounder. And there might be multiple picks with your club in the same round, and you might be the 2nd pick of the 2 picks in the 7th round. It doesn't matter. You're still a draft pick. You still have that badge of honor that you were drafted. And there's only, I don't even know what the percentages are of the human race that actually get an opportunity to get drafted in the NFL. And it's a little bit higher for the players that play football, obviously, but it's still ridiculously low. So anybody that gets drafted this weekend should be very, very honored and proud and take advantage of the opportunity they have to build an NFL career with the team that drafts them. So one of the things I want to do today is talk about just the whole ambiance of the draft process from the player's perspective. And there's really 2 different perspectives. You've got the guys that go to the draft, that are in the green room, that got everything on the line, man. Their balls are on the line because they're in front of a national TV audience, multiple networks, and they've got media guys putting their mics in front of them going, hey, did you think you should have been picked with that 17th pick? When do you think you're going to get picked? I thought you were going to get picked earlier. You were projected to go top 10. You know, you got the Warren Sapps that fell and the Aaron Rodgerses, and every year there's somebody. Who's going to be that guy this year? You know, you don't want to be that guy, okay? Ironically, it seems like most guys that fall in the draft that are coveted in the top 5 and go much later in the 1st round, they all become all pros because they've got so much to prove. They've been humiliated, embarrassed, and just stripped of their pride on draft night in front of a national TV audience. You can't get a chip on your shoulder bigger than that. Then you've got the guys that are sitting at home that invited their families. You know, they may be 3rd day players and they're just got their fingers crossed, their toes crossed. They got mom and dad and grandparents and cousins and girlfriends and everybody is there. And what happens typically is for those guys that get drafted early, it's a celebration, it's a party. For those guys that get drafted later, they go through a psychological awakening of sorts in the sense that a lot of them leave the premises. A lot of them go for walks. A lot of them lock themselves in their room. They find an escape because they just don't like their family members and friends who are having some brews and having some fun and enjoying the process. And after every single pick, their eyes shift from the TV to their son, to their brother, to their cousin to see how he reacts. And so you're really putting yourself in a position of vulnerability when you have a party because they're watching your reaction to see how they should react. And then there's the natural empathy and patronizing that goes on, like, hey, I know you're better than him. Hey, man, they're stupid because they didn't pick you. All those kind of comments take place just to make the player feel better, or at least they think they're making the player feel better, but they're really not. Because the players know you really don't have any control in the process. A team could have you as a third rounder on their board. They take a different player at your position in the third round, and you may not be on other people's board until the fifth, and so you slide 2 rounds, but you could have been a third rounder, but you end up being a fifth rounder. And it's all just because of happenstance and circumstance that you have no control over. So one thing about the draft that's pretty amazing is that players obviously get picked where they get picked, but they could have been picked much higher in many cases or much lower in many cases, depending on how things fall. So it's fair to say that if the NFL did the draft, held the draft 100 times, that a player might be picked in 50 or 60 different slots. And there may be a few teams that take the same pick in the third round or fifth round or sixth round, whatever it may be. But most of the time they would take somebody different because of the way the draft ahead of them falls. So with all that being said, the critical component related to mindset for draftees is how they respond to what happens, not really what happens. Because they don't have any control what happens. The teams have their draft boards set before the combine. They've got their medical reports. They have their combine results. They have their interview information. But at the end of the day, what's most important for these guys is how they played on Saturdays during the season. What kind of tape do they have in the can? The only control a player has with respect to dealing with the draft is after he takes his signing bonus check to the bank, is how he responds to what happened on draft weekend. Well, we've seen what Aaron Rodgers has done. He's been to a couple Super Bowls. He's won one, fallen to the 22nd, I think, pick. That was humiliating for him. A lot of players respond appropriately after they don't get drafted as high as they were hoping. But some players have the wrong mindset, which is, hey, if I got picked in the 7th round, I guess I'm just a 7th round talent. I guess I should just play like a 7th rounder. And maybe they don't play in the NFL very long. In fact, only about 2/3 of the draft picks make the opening day rosters. Typically, 100% of the players drafted in 1s through 4 make the active 53 absent an IR situation, an injury situation. But in the 5th, 6th, and 7th round, there's only about half the guys that make the active 53. There's a bunch more that make the practice squad, and there's a few that just don't get another opportunity. Not very many of those guys. But it's how you respond to what happens on draft day that determines the trajectory of your career after draft day. And the last thing I'll say about the draft is that even though the draft for 2019 is this weekend, these young men that go through the 2019 draft will relive their experiences and relive the impact of future drafts every single year because their club is potentially trying to replace them, upgrade talent, get bigger, faster, stronger, get something that particular player maybe doesn't bring to the table in a future draft. So even though you only go through the draft once, in reality, every NFL player goes through the draft every single year. What I wanted to kind of talk about was the different mindsets of NFL teams, the different mindsets of NFL GMs, and the things that they have to do to be cognizant of with respect to their draft process. Number one is they have to pay attention to their ownership. Every GM has got to get sign-off, buy-in from the ownership, especially for the first round pick. Clearing the ownership of and, confirming for the ownership that the player has a good track record off the field. We're not going to get any surprises about any videos or any Twitter accounts or Twitter postings or anything like that the young man may have made earlier in his life. Secondly, the GM has to be copacetic and amenable to the media and be able to sell each and every pick. And so right after the pick, the GM's got to be ready to go live and explain the merits of this pick, the future contribution they envision for that player, compare and contrast that particular player with players from other positions or other players at the same position, and convince and build a strong case to the media why such and such team made a great move in making that selection. The next thing the GM has to do, and this starts back in January and February when they start doing pre-draft meetings, is just get buy-in from the coaches. Make sure that you're not drafting someone that the coaches don't want. Most organizations are family, and you don't want to adopt somebody that one of the members of the family doesn't get along with. And so you've got to get the coaches buy-in. And where that really comes into play is when you've got two talented young men at the same position and you've got mixed opinions within the building. You don't have a consensus about who's the best. There's arguments for both. So you might have it down to 2, maybe down to 3, but there's solid arguments in the building for any of the 2 or 3. And so that puts the onus on the GM to make the call and put his nuts on the line and advocate for why that player is the right player, and put the coaches that were in the dissenting groups at ease that the organization made the right pick. And then one other group the GM has to appease and address is his own scouting department. The credibility of a GM is based upon their decision making, the critical decisions they make with respect to roster construction, signing and tenders of their veteran players, free agent acquisition, and perhaps most importantly, their draft classes. And so one of the things that GMs have to be very conscious of is drafting the players that the scouts, the cross-checkers, the area scouts, the regional scouts, the national scouts, and the coaches believe we're the best. What that really means is the GM needs to follow the board. GMs have the autonomy and the authority to bounce around the board, but the ones that stick to the board have the most credibility within the building. I'm going to have today several guests. One is a former GM for 2 different NFL teams. He's been in the NFL business for more than 2 decades and is one of the most respected talent evaluators in the business, Scot McCloughan. He does consulting for NFL teams at the moment, and he's going to talk about the NFL draft. And then I'm going to have some of my former clients talk about their experiences during their NFL draft. And I picked guys that were mostly drafted later that had to wait, as opposed to the guy that had the party, got the call, and it was over. So obviously you would rather be that guy than the guy that had to wait. But it's more fun to hear about the experiences about the guys that actually had to sit and wait. And I don't know in my mind how many total hours the draft consumes. But when you consider Thursday night, at least 3 hours, Friday night, at least 3 hours, Saturday, 5 to 6 to 7 hours, it's a long process. And so if a young man is drafted in the 6th or 7th round, he's absolutely emotionally exhausted by the time he gets the phone call. And there's so much celebration and elation when you get that phone call, but a lot of it's just a release of pressure, a release of stress from waiting and wondering, am I ever going to get that phone call? So without further ado, we're going to move into hearing some excerpts from Scot McCloughan and Greg Scruggs. Thank you for listening. Hey, I want to welcome a special guest today, Scot McCloughan, who is one of the most respected NFL evaluators on the planet. And Scot has been a GM for multiple teams and been in the NFL for over 20-some years. Scot, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Craig. I appreciate being here.
Okay, so Scot, with many years as a scout, director of college, various personnel positions, and also just being the GM of 2 organizations, what was your mindset going into draft weekend after you spent
effectively 10 months or more getting ready for that weekend.
Well, the thing about it is, you're right, and it's not just about the GM. I mean, I'm making the final call when it's said and done, but it's also your area scouts are very, very important. What you do in pro free agency with the pro scouts is very important prior to the draft to know you got to fill some needs, and that's why I think in pro free agency, that's how you do it. You fill needs. I think with the college draft, by now, my personal opinion, the way I ran them, it's over. The board's set. Now you have your last medical meeting with the doctors. You bring ownership in, show them the board. And, of course, you're dealing with the, head coach, coordinators, position coaches, when you need to every day if you have a question. But if you're still doing work now with tape and about evaluating players, you're behind the 8 ball. You're behind it. It should be done. The way Ron Wolf taught us, like I said, there's 5 general managers came out of Ron Wolf's class when we were all together in Green Bay. That 95% of the board is set prior to the combine. It doesn't change much. Now, you get the medical, of course you do the interviews, and that changes stuff, but 95% set. You might move a guy from the bottom of the second to the top of the second, or, move a 5th rounder to the 4th rounder, or you got to, from pro days, you go from a free agent to a 7th rounder, which is great. What you want scouts to fight for their guys. Not meaning they're always right, but because they know them. And, so it's very unique. But if anybody's still saying right now that they're still, evaluating, it's wrong. If it's the truth, then they haven't done their jobs.
Okay, so let's go back to that point in time, probably in early February, right after the Super Bowl, when teams typically have their first draft meetings after the coordinator of college scouting has collected everybody's reports. And now you kind of have this body of work to work with. What is your approach during that time? Because that's pre-combine, and would it be fair to say that's the most important time? What is the most important time?
I'd have all the reports, all the grades right in front of me. I'd bring all the scouts in, and then sit there and we would go through A to Z by position. Anybody that was graded draftable, anybody that was graded free agent, any all-star guy or a combine guy. And you pound it out. It's like 17 days. And you just sit there, you go from 7 to 7, and you just pound it out. And you start setting the board. From a talent standpoint, it's not hard. It's not hard at all. You can see a corner that's got great feet, got great hips, got speed, got quickness. Okay, boom. How about ball skills? Good. Okay. So you place them on the draft board. But then as you roll through it, the thing that's really good for not just for myself, but for the area scouts, especially the younger ones, is to see, okay, I'm in the Midwest and I gave a 3rd round grade to this guy. Then all of a sudden you see a guy from the SEC. He's like, holy smokes, I'm off. But it's not the fact of being off, because I'd never judge them for that whatsoever, but they learn. And that's how you make good scouts. And I think I was lucky enough to be around good scouts when I first started, and I hope I trained good scouts. Now you see the difference. He's like, oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, my guy runs 4.55. This guy runs 4.3. And, and we got him in the 3rd round on the draft board. It's very unique dynamic. It's long, and I try to help the guys out, and I'll try to send them home before the combine, to see their wives or their girlfriends and the kids. It's long. It's a grind. It's a grind. But you know what? I was lucky enough to learn from Ron Wolf, and then Ted Thompson brought me to Seattle, and same process. And then, of course, I went to San Fran. I ran the same process. I went to Seattle with John Schneider. Same process. That's all I know. Doesn't mean it's right, but you can see over longevity the amount of Pro Bowlers, the amount of Super Bowls that the teams I've been with have. And I think that's ideal. I don't think it's just like, okay, we're going to keep all the scouts out. It's just going to be me, you, and him. I don't agree with that. And I want the opinions, and I trust opinions, and I need the opinions. No one's smart enough to do it by themselves. I guarantee it.
No question. And when you have a process or a system over decades, it gets refined. And so it even gets better. And the substance doesn't change, but maybe you get a little bit smarter about certain parts of it.
Oh, yeah. The process is the process. It's very important.
Greg, welcome to Pro Mindset. I want to thank you for being on the show today. And I want to thank you for giving your perspective on draft weekend. It wasn't that many years ago that you were leaving the University of Louisville, yep, and you were eligible for the draft. And you had trained in Denver with Lauren Landau, who's now with the Broncos. You had done all these things to get yourself ready. What was your mindset and what was your vibe? Describe the atmosphere, what you did. Who was there? Family, friends, girlfriend, brothers, things like that. And then what was your mindset before the draft even started? What were you thinking?
To set the stage, my family, we had a gathering over at the house. I invited a lot of family. You and I were under the impression that, that we had a bunch of teams interested. And so I wasn't going to do anything unless I knew there was genuine interest that I would get drafted, because I wasn't that prideful. And from where we were coming from, with no all-star games, no Senior Bowl or anything like that invites, no combine invite, just straight training and visits. I wasn't going to do anything. For me on draft day, to set the stage, I wasn't going to do anything unless I knew that we had a good inkling that I could have been drafted, that I was going to get drafted. And then, so I invited a bunch of people over, all the people close to me, my brothers, my girlfriend, and, family. And my mindset was that we had an inkling that I may get drafted in the third round. So when the second and third, but that was a far long shot. Second or third round, I sat and just watched. No big thing, no hoopla. I didn't even lie to myself or kid to myself that it may happen. And if it did, that was God's grace. It was only going to be me and my pops, and that was going to be it. Draft day, I was ready to rock, only because of the information that we had been getting. I believe draft day, we got called at about 9 o'clock. I think it was 9 o'clock. You called me about 8:30 or 9 o'clock to make sure I was up, because I needed to be up, because the fourth round was going to start quick, and that's where a couple people were going to take me, or where some people had me on their board. So draft day.
So Greg, let me interject something here. So we had pretty good evidence and intel that your name was going to get called at some point in time. We didn't know when, yep, but you never want to put a ceiling on a young man. Nope. Oh man, you can't go in the first. You're not going to go to the seventh, and things like that, because it's so unpredictable. And sometimes guys that think they're going to go in the fifth go in the third. And sometimes they think they're going to go in the fifth. They don't go at all.
Right.
So with that being said, you are sitting there with family, lots of food, watching, eyeballs peeled to the TV. Is that fair?
No, I left.
Absolutely. I knew it. After a while, everybody gets frustrated and gets the hell out of there.
No,
you can't take it anymore.
Well,
you start seeing clowns get picked, and you're like, you're better than them.
Well, I left in full transparency. I left before the draft started.
Where'd you go?
I just started walking. There was a strip. The road was a end road court. So, however, court is defined. And I paced that road. I began to pace that road because the anxiety of sitting and watching, I think it was for two reasons. The first one being this. The first one, the anxiety of just watching and waiting your fate. I'm being a person that's always tried to do his best to see where he was going or try to control where he was going. That was nerve-wracking. But the second part was, I think as I reflect on it, was if I didn't get taken where I was supposed to, how do I explain to my family or all these people that I had come over here what's going on? Because, mind you, nothing had ever happened like this in my family before. And so while my family would have been proud of me either way, and I understand that now as a person of pride who put a lot of effort and energy into this, who only did this because I told people that I'm most likely going to get drafted based on information that we've been given. How do I explain to them when I don't get drafted, or how do I look at them? It was a little bit a sense of embarrassment, so you could call it pride. And so that's why I left before the draft started. But I didn't really leave because my old man was still texting me who was picking where and when they were picking. And I did my best not to check my phone, but it was inevitable because I didn't want to miss when I got picked. So,
well, in fairness to you, Greg, in fairness to you and all the young men that go through this process, when else in your life do you ever get a phone call and somebody says, this is how much you're going to make, this is where you're going to live, and this is who your boss is going to be? I mean, that's just crazy.
Never. Yeah.
It will never happen again.
No, not at that age.
Right, and you get to decide where you're going to go and if you want to move and change positions and change countries and cities and states and et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But in this environment, a phone call dictates your near-term future.
Yep.
I mean, you're literally jumping on an airplane to go where whoever drafts you.
10 days later, as a matter of fact. But that's nervous. That makes you really nervous because you have not the slightest clue, unless you are a bona fide top 10 pick. Even then, if you're not the first overall, between the first 2 or 3, even then, you still don't know. Stuff gets switched up all the time on you. So, yeah, for me, that was my setting. That was the environment. I was just nervous and anxious from the get-go because if it didn't work out, it's a lot easier to walk back into the house after being drafted than being in the house and not being drafted at all.
But one of the things that I will tell you that I know from talking to other players that I've represented is the eyeballs will pierce you. Because every time there's a pick and it's not you, all your loved ones, their eyes go straight to you. They want to see your reaction. They want to see if it's okay. Like maybe you didn't want to go to that team. Maybe they didn't come to your pro day. Maybe they didn't interview you, things of that nature. Or maybe you thought that could have been one of the teams and they took a guy at your position. And you're like, whoa, they should have picked me.
Yeah, you raised an interesting point, and it didn't striking a nerve is not the right word, but it kind of triggered something in me. I didn't want my family to start to try to provide justification, which is oftentimes in culture and family what they do, right? What you said, all right, well, maybe you didn't want to go to that team, maybe this was happening, or maybe this was God's plan in your will. Like, no, I'm going to go where I'm going to go, and I don't want to sit here and have to reason with you. Like, don't sit here and try to reason with me why it didn't happen. For the same reason that I have anxiety that I can't control it is the same reason that I know it's out of my control. So don't try to justify where I am or where I'm going. Like, I want you to understand that I'm going to be where I'm supposed to be, and whether a team takes me or not, I'm going to make the most of it happen. I'm going to do my best anyway. And so I think that is a reason that I hated and I didn't want to hear justification. No, there is no reason. Whatever it is, whether I'm a maniac or telling myself I just wasn't good enough and that was the chip on my shoulder, or whether I was just angry because I was good enough and for whatever reason the chip didn't fall, with the kind of ignorance, if you will, of my family to this whole process, I didn't want to hear justification for anything. Because whatever was supposed to happen was going to happen, and I was going to make it happen, and I didn't want to have too much side conversation about it. So that may have played another thing into it, is that when the pick doesn't happen, I don't want to have to sit here and listen to you try to justify it, because you're only going to piss me off. Because there's other people in this world who don't get an excuse. Plenty of people who have done it who aren't going to get that excuse. So let's not sit here and boo-boo it, right? Like, which is what families try to do. I'm not here for the boo-boo. Come on, tell me where I'm going, where are we going to play, and let's go roll. I don't know it. I can't control it, so that makes me nervous, and I don't want to sit here and look y'all in the face and tell you why I didn't end up there, but I also don't want y'all to sit here and try to make excuses for me. Please don't. I'm good. So I think that played into it as well.
No doubt. And, Greg, so let's fast forward to when you get called by the Seattle Seahawks. Who called you?
Todd Wash called me first.
Okay. What did Todd say?
Todd Wash called, asked me if I would come out there as a priority free agent? I said yes, but somehow, some way, word got to him that I realistically was saying no. If you remember, I think we were deciding between Baltimore and Indy, but I wasn't going to Seattle as a free agent, no chance. And he hung up, and about maybe 5 minutes later, Todd Wash called again and said he's running down the hall to go talk to Pete because he heard that I said I wasn't coming. And he went and talked to Pete. Somehow, some way, I believe we hung up the phone, and then right after that, I got another call back from John Schneider at that point. Or it might have been Pete, but I'm almost positive it was John Schneider at that point who then let me, who kind of gave me the news. And there was something powerful in between it that happened that I really attribute a lot of it to. And because I've seen the story before in my life more than one time. So there was a pretty powerful moment in there. But that's how that whole thing went down.
Well, let me share with you a little bit of a backstory, and that is that when the teams start getting later in the draft, they have multiple guys. I mean, most NFL teams would love to have 20 draft picks because they got 20 guys they'd like to draft, but they can't get them all. So when it gets down to the 6th, 7th round, they start making feeler calls. And on those feeler calls, they get an impression from that player, and then they typically call the agent to get a verification of what the player's impression was. So, like, if the player's desperate, that's great because then they know no one else has called them. And when they call the agent, they ask the agent, "Hey, man, would you consider signing your client with us as a free agent? We really love him. We just can't draft him." And the agent says, "Oh, yeah, that'd be great." The kid's not getting drafted because they don't need to draft him because they've already got a verbal commitment, which is not written, but it's pretty strong that they're going to get him. So if they do that to 3 or 4 different guys, they draft the guy that they got to draft to get because they may be, you were a defensive end. They might have liked the guy as a tight end, may have liked the guy as a receiver. They can't draft everybody. So they draft the guy that they like that they have to draft. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense.
And so it's almost uncanny how players sometimes put value, post-draft now, put value in where they got picked. But, your draft class was pretty stellar, if I remember correctly. You had Bruce Irvin, you had J.R. Sweezy, or Russell Wilson, I mean.
Yeah, Bruce
and Russell.
Bobby. Yeah, Bruce.
Bobby Wagner. Holy
Russell.
Smokes.
Yeah, Bruce, Bobby, Russell, Jay Howard, Robert Turbin, Jeremy Lane, Winston Guy, Corey Toomer, J.R. Sweezy, and myself.
That is a Hall of Fame type class.
Yeah, everybody, unfortunately, you and I both know, and I'm not going to live in the past, but had it not been for my knee injury, I would have been on my second contract. Bobby obviously got a second contract. Bruce got a second contract. Russ is obviously doing what he's done. Squeezy got his second contract. Turbo had a good run at it. Winston had a decent run at it. I think he got 5 years in. Sweezy got his second contract. Jeremy Lane got his second contract. So, yeah. We had an F, though. They gave us an F. That
shows you how much the draftniks know. The thing that would have been interesting is if you guys could all got together when you first arrived in Seattle and said, "Hey, we're going to put all our money in a pool. We're all going to take like 1/9 or 1/10 of it because Russell is the highest paid player in the NFL as we speak today.
Yep.
And, Bruce has been paid crazy amount of money. Wagner's been recognized as one of the best in the league at his position, and he's been paid, and he'll be paid again. It would have been probably an average of over $25 million per guy.
Oh yeah, no doubt. I do got a nugget, okay, and I feel like I'd be doing a disservice if I didn't. When I was getting drafted, talk about draft day, being a man of faith, what happened was I finally came back to the house after the 6th round. 7th round, Seahawks were coming up. They took J.R. Sweezy. I walked in the house, hadn't heard anything. Family kind of was quiet. Todd Wash called me before I walked in the house. I got off the phone with Todd, walked in the house. My great-grandmother saw me. She called up a prayer circle. I walked out the house, but felt like I should go back in the house because I really didn't know what to do with myself. in the middle of walking in the house, the only part I heard out of the prayer circle was that my great-grandmother say, "And God, if it is your will, it shall be done." Pause. What's powerful about that, for all the believers out there and wherever they stand in their faith, is that it isn't the first time in my life, and it won't be the last time, that when I finally decide to let go of trying to control and the anxiousness and anxiety of everything that was moving in me, and when I finally decide to let go and let something much more powerful and bigger than me call the shots and make the decisions, and when that release was felt is when the time some type of breakthrough always happens. That's the only part of the prayer circle that I heard before I closed the door. I couldn't even get off of the garage step for the door after that before my phone rang and the Seattle Seahawks called me back to tell me that they were taking me. That was the powerful moment that I said happened when they called me back. So I don't know where your podcast goes or who listens or whatever, but I'll be doing a disservice if I didn't say that, if I didn't mention that. That was the actual powerful moment that happened. Pacing all day up the street, anger, sadness, frustration, happiness, every emotion that you can imagine I felt. That was the sequence of events. Call from Todd, hang up, walk in, walk back out. As I'm walking out, they form a prayer circle, pop my head back in, but they had already started praying. I didn't want to interject or intersect. I heard them say it. I turn around and walk out. As the door closed, before I could get off the steps, and I felt that relief over my body that, Lord, if it is your will, it shall be done. Boom, relax, phone rings before I get off the step. Seattle Seahawks call and say, man, we're going to go ahead and take you, and then the rest was curtains. There you go. That was the powerful moment. So I felt like I had to give my good Lord his credit where his credit is due. That's the way I perceived it.
No, he had something to do with it, and that's our Father's prayer. Thy will be done. And I think that when you're looking at the draft as a player, I'm just guessing, being on this side as an agent, we want to control it. We want to dictate it. We want to influence it. But the Lord's got a plan. And Lord's going to take care of everybody the way they're supposed to be taken care of. And we don't know the reasons why certain players go higher when their makeup and their statistics and their profile, the profiles are identical. You might have a guy going the first and a guy going the third, and they look like the same guy. Put on tape, and they look like the same guy to most people. So it's a crazy, crazy thing. I want to thank you for being on today.
I just want to thank everyone for listening to our draft edition of Pro Mindset Podcast. It's given us an opportunity today to give you an inside perspective on what GMs deal with, what players deal with, what agents deal with. And one of the things I would like to say from the agent perspective is we want the absolute very best for every single one of our clients, and we want them to get drafted as high as possible. But at the end of the day, what's more important than getting drafted as high as possible is actually getting drafted by the correct team that's a good fit, that's a good scheme fit, where there's an opportunity and a vision for the player to be successful, where there's coaches that want him, that will develop and be patient with his mental errors and development, and an organization that will pour into him to help him maximize his NFL career, which is also going to maximize his money and put him in the best possible position when he's finished. So even though on the surface everybody wants to get their players drafted as high as possible, if you got drafted a round later by a team that's a better fit, it will serve the player better in the long run. So good luck. Enjoy the draft this weekend. Get lots of refreshments and find your place on the couch. And I hope that your team selects the guys that help your team go to the Super Bowl. Thank you for listening to this episode of Pro Mindset. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. 5 stars, of course. You can follow us on our website, ProMindsetPodcast.com, or on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Pro Mindset Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you the next time.